Billionaire rushed to the hospital in anger, but one newborn cry destroyed the cold walls of his heart. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from, and once the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Oh, and make sure to follow our channel for more stories like this. Now, sit back and enjoy every detail. The coffee had gone cold 3 hours ago, but Elias Thorne hadn't noticed. He sat behind the mahogany desk of his 42nd floor office, staring at quarterly aviation reports that blurred together like watercolors in rain. The Seattle skyline stretched endlessly beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, but his mind was elsewhere, trapped in a loop of memories he'd spent 8 months trying to bury, her laugh echoing through the elevator, her fingers accidentally brushing his as she handed him documents, the way she'd tuck that stubborn strand of auburn hair behind her ear when she was concentrating. Ava Bennett had been gone from Thorne Aviation for 8 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days. Not that he was counting. The buzzer on his desk phone jolted him back to reality. His current assistant, a efficient but utterly forgettable woman named Constance, spoke through the intercom. "Mr. Thorne, you have the Morrison contract review in 10 minutes, and the board meeting at 3. Should I cancel them?" Elias said without looking up. "Sir? Cancel everything for today." He rubbed his temples, feeling the familiar weight of exhaustion that had become his constant companion since that morning when he destroyed the best thing that had ever happened to him. The memory crashed over him like a rogue wave. Ava standing in his office doorway, her green eyes wide with hurt and confusion. "Elias, please, just listen to me. There's nothing between Jameson and me. There never was, but he'd already made up his mind. Already convinced himself that the polite smile she'd given his business partner during their merger meeting meant something more. It was good while it lasted, Ava. Let's keep this professional from here on out. The way her face crumpled, the way she'd whispered, "I thought you knew me better than that." Elias pushed back from his desk and walked to the window. Somewhere out there in this vast city, she was living a life that didn't include him. He'd made sure of that with his paranoid assumptions and his inability to trust the one person who'd actually seen through his carefully constructed walls. His phone rang. He almost didn't answer. Constance knew better than to transfer calls when he was in one of his moods, but something made him glance at the display. Unknown number, local area code, Thorne, Mr. Thorne? The voice was female, professional, with an underlying urgency that made his chest tighten. "This is Nurse Davidson from Harborview Medical Center. I'm calling about Ava Bennett." The world tilted. "What about her?" His voice came out rougher than intended. "She was admitted this morning in active labor. She asked us to contact you. Said you were the father." The phone slipped from his hand, clattering against the desk before he caught it. His knees threatened to buckle. "Mr. Thorne? Are you there? Labor. Father. Ava." 1,000 thoughts crashed through his mind simultaneously. The math was impossible to ignore. 8 months since she'd left, 9 months for a pregnancy, which meant she'd been carrying his child when he'd thrown her out of his life like she was nothing. "Sir, if you're planning to come, she's in the maternity ward. Room." Elias was already moving, grabbing his keys, his coat, leaving everything else behind. His heart hammered against his ribs as he waited for the elevator, each second stretching into eternity. The ride to the hospital passed in a blur of traffic lights and half-formed prayers to a God he hadn't spoken to since he was 7 years old. He parked haphazardly in the emergency zone, not caring about tickets or towing. The antiseptic smell of the hospital hit him like a physical force as he strode through the automatic doors. His Italian leather shoes clicked against the polished linoleum as he followed signs to the maternity ward, each step echoing the frantic beating of his heart. He was almost to the elevator when he heard it, a sound that stopped him dead in his tracks and shattered every carefully constructed wall he'd built around his heart. The thin, desperate wail of a newborn baby, echoing down the sterile corridor like a battle cry. And in that moment, Elias Thorne realized that everything he thought he knew about his life had just changed forever. That cry pierced through every defense Elias had ever built, and for a moment, he couldn't breathe. He stood frozen in the hospital corridor, his expensive suit suddenly feeling like a costume, his carefully maintained composure cracking like ice under pressure. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in harsh, unforgiving white. Families hurried past him, some crying tears of joy, others clutching each other in worry. But he remained motionless, a statue in the middle of their chaos. A baby, His baby. The elevator dinged, and a young couple emerged, the woman cradling a bundle of pink blankets. They were laughing softly, whispering to each other with the kind of intimacy that made Elias's chest ache with recognition. He remembered being that happy once, for exactly 3 months and 12 days before his paranoia had poisoned everything good in his life. "Sir, are you all right?" A nurse in scrubs covered with tiny cartoon stethoscopes was looking at him with concern. She couldn't be more than 25, with kind eyes that reminded him painfully of Ava's. "I'm looking for room." He realized he'd hung up before getting the room number. Ava Bennett. She had a baby. The nurse's expression softened with understanding. "Are you the father?" The question hit him like a physical blow. Was he? Biologically, almost certainly. But what did that word even mean? His own father had been nothing more than a signature on trust fund documents and a voice on the other end of boarding school phone calls. "I think so," he said, and the honesty of it surprised him. "Room 314, 3rd floor." She pointed toward the elevator bank. "Visiting hours end at 8, but for immediate family..." He was already walking away, his long strides eating up the distance to the elevator. His hand shook as he pressed the button, a tremor he hadn't experienced since his first major business presentation 15 years ago. The ride to the 3rd floor felt eternal. He caught his reflection in the polished steel doors, disheveled dark hair, 5 o'clock shadow, eyes that looked like they'd seen a ghost, which in a way, they had. The ghost of the man he could have been if he hadn't been so afraid of being hurt that he'd hurt everyone else first. Room 314 was halfway down a corridor that smelled of industrial disinfectant and new beginnings. Through the partially open door, he could hear quiet voices. A woman's soft murmur, the rustle of blankets, the gentle hush of medical equipment. He raised his hand to knock, then let it fall. What was he supposed to say? "Sorry I abandoned you when you were carrying my child because I was too much of a coward to have a conversation." Before he could lose his nerve entirely, a different nurse emerged from the room. Older, with steel gray hair and the no-nonsense bearing of someone who'd delivered 1,000 babies and heard every excuse in the book. "You must be Mr. Thorne," she said, and there was something in her tone that made it clear Ava had told her exactly what kind of man he was. "She's been asking if you were coming. Is she? Are they both okay? Healthy baby boy, 7 pounds, 2 ounces. Mom's exhausted, but doing fine." The nurse studied him with sharp eyes. "She went through labor alone, you know. 12 hours, no partner, no family, just her and the pain." The words landed like bullets, each one finding its mark. Elias closed his eyes briefly, imagining Ava scared and alone, clutching the hospital bed rails through contractions with no one to hold her hand or tell her she was brave. Can I see them?" "That depends. Are you here to make things better or to make them worse?" He met her stare directly. "I don't know yet." Something in his honesty must have satisfied her, because she stepped aside. "She's awake. The baby's sleeping. And Mr. Thorne, whatever you did before, now's your chance to do better." He nodded, not trusting his voice, and stepped into the room. The first thing he saw was Ava, propped up against pillows, her auburn hair damp with sweat and falling in gentle waves around her face. She looked exhausted and radiant and absolutely heartbreaking all at once. Her green eyes met his across the small space, and he saw no anger there, just a bone-deep weariness that made him want to fall to his knees and beg her forgiveness. The second thing he saw was the bassinet beside her bed, and the tiny, perfect human being sleeping inside it, his son. "Hello, Elias," Ava said quietly, her voice hoarse from hours of labor. "I wasn't sure you'd come." The silence stretched between them like a chasm, filled with 8 months of unspoken words and broken promises. Elias stood in the doorway, his hands clenched at his sides, drinking in the sight of her. Ava looked different, not just tired from labor, but changed in some fundamental way. There was a strength in her posture that hadn't been there before, a quiet dignity that made his chest tighten with both admiration and regret. "You look," he started, then stopped. "Beautiful, exhausted, like everything he'd thrown away." None of the words felt adequate. "Like I just delivered your son," she finished for him, and there was no bitterness in her voice, just a matter-of-fact gentleness that somehow hurt more than anger would have. He took a tentative step into the room, his expensive shoes silent on the hospital linoleum. The bassinet drew his eyes like a magnet, but he couldn't bring himself to look directly at the sleeping baby yet. If he did, if he saw his own features reflected in that tiny face, he might break completely. Why didn't you tell me? The question escaped before he could stop it. Ava's laugh was soft and hollow. When? Before or after you decided I was sleeping with your business partner based on a polite smile? The words hit him like a slap, but he deserved them. He deserved worse. Ava, I tried to tell you that morning, she continued, her voice growing stronger. I came to your office at 7:30 before anyone else arrived. I had the test results in my purse and this ridiculous speech planned about how scared I was, but how maybe we could figure it out together. Elias remembered that morning with painful clarity. She'd knocked on his door, looking nervous and beautiful in a way that had made his paranoid heart assume the worst. He'd been so convinced that she was coming to confess her affair with Jameson that he'd cut her off before she could speak. Save it, Ava. I know what this is about. Let's just keep things simple. She'd stared at him for a long moment, her lips parted as if she wanted to say something. Then she'd simply nodded and walked away. He'd thought it was guilt. It had been heartbreak. I was going to tell you about the baby, she whispered, her fingers absently stroking the edge of the hospital blanket. But you looked at me like I was a stranger, like everything we'd shared meant nothing. So I decided that if you could throw us away so easily, maybe you didn't deserve to know. The admission hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Elias sank into the uncomfortable visitor's chair beside her bed, suddenly feeling every one of his 39 years. I was scared, he said quietly, the words scraping against his throat like broken glass. Scared that you'd figure out I wasn't worth staying for. Scared that what we had was too good to be real. When I saw you smile at Jameson during that meeting, you saw what you expected to see, Ava said, turning to look at him fully for the first time since he'd entered the room. You saw proof that I was just like everyone else who'd left you. But Elias, I never wanted to leave. You pushed me out. A small sound from the bassinet made them both freeze. The baby stirred, tiny fists emerging from the swaddle blanket, and made a soft mewling noise that went straight to Elias's heart like an arrow. He's been sleeping for 2 hours, Ava said, her voice softening as she gazed at the bassinet. The longest stretch since he was born. I think he was waiting for you. What's his name? For the first time, something that might have been a smile ghosted across her lips. I couldn't decide. I kept thinking his father should have a say in that. The simple statement undid him. After everything he'd put her through, after abandoning her when she needed him most, she'd still reserved that right for him, still held space for him in their son's life. He gestured toward the bassinet, his voice barely above a whisper. Ava nodded and Elias stood on unsteady legs. 3 steps brought him to the edge of the bassinet, and he looked down at his son for the first time. The baby was perfect. Impossibly small and absolutely perfect, with a shock of dark hair that looked exactly like Elias's baby pictures and Ava's delicate nose. His little chest rose and fell with the rhythm of new life, and his tiny fingers were curled into fists, as if he was already ready to fight the world. He looks like you, Ava whispered from behind him. Elias reached out with one finger to touch the baby's hand, and impossibly those tiny fingers uncurled and wrapped around his, holding on with surprising strength. And in that moment, as his son's grip anchored him to something bigger than his own fear, Elias Thorne realized he was looking at his second chance. We need to talk, he said without taking his eyes off the baby. Really talk, about everything. Yes, Ava agreed quietly. We do. The baby's grip on his finger was surprisingly strong, like he was anchoring Elias to something real for the first time in months. He has your stubborn streak already, Ava said softly, watching as their son refused to let go. There was something almost like warmth in her voice, the first crack in the careful distance she'd maintained since he'd walked through the door. Elias couldn't look away from the tiny face. Every detail seemed impossibly precious, the way the baby's eyelashes fanned against his cheeks, the soft rhythm of his breathing, the miniature fingernails that were somehow perfectly formed. This was his child, his son. The reality of it was overwhelming. How did you manage? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. All these months, alone. I wasn't completely alone. Ava shifted carefully in the hospital bed, wincing slightly. Mrs. Kellerman from the apartment next door helped me set up the nursery. And there's a support group at the community center for single mothers. They taught me about car seats and cribs and all the things I never thought I'd need to know. Each word was a knife between his ribs. She'd built a life, a support system, a future for their child. all while he'd been drowning in his own misery and pride. He'd been so focused on his wounded ego that he'd missed everything that actually mattered. I bought every pregnancy book Barnes & Noble had in stock, she continued, and now there was definitely a hint of a smile in her voice. I think I memorized what to expect when you're expecting. I used to read to him every night before bed. You knew it was a boy? Since the 20-week ultrasound, I almost called you that day. I had your number dialed and everything. But then I remembered the way you looked at me that last morning, and I couldn't do it. The baby stirred again, making a soft cooing sound that was somehow both heartbreaking and healing. His eyes opened slowly, dark gray, like storm clouds, exactly like Elias's own. "Hello there," Elias whispered, and the baby seemed to focus on his voice. "I'm sorry I'm late." Ava was quiet for a long moment, watching the interaction between father and son. When she spoke again, her voice was carefully neutral. "The nurses need a name for the birth certificate. I've been calling him Baby Bennett for now." "Bennett? It's my name," she said simply. "I didn't think I had the right to use yours." The assumption hit him harder than any accusation could have. Of course she'd used her own name. Why would she give his name to a child whose father had abandoned them both? "What would you have called him?" he asked. If things had been different, Ava was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, Wesley James. It was my grandfather's name. He raised me after my parents died in that car accident when I was 12. He was the only man who never let me down. The implication stung, but Elias accepted it. He'd earned her distrust. "Wesley," he repeated, testing the name. The baby's eyes seemed to widen at the sound. "Wesley Thorne. Elias. He's my son too," he said quietly, finally looking up from the bassinet to meet her eyes. "I know I have no right to ask for anything after what I did. I know I destroyed whatever trust we had, but he's my son and I want him to have my name. I want him to know he belongs to both of us." Ava studied his face for a long moment, searching for something. And what happens when you get scared again? When something makes you doubt or second guess everything? Do I get another cold dismissal? Does Wesley lose his father all over again? The questions were fair and brutal and necessary. Elias carefully extracted his finger from his son's grip and moved to the chair beside Ava's bed, close enough to see the exhaustion in her eyes and the careful walls she'd built around her heart. "I can't promise I won't make mistakes," he said. "I can't promise I won't get scared or say the wrong thing, but I can promise that I'll never walk away again. Not from him, not from you, not without a fight." Pretty words, Elias. You always were good with pretty words. Then let me prove it with actions. He leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "Let me be here. Let me learn how to change diapers and warm bottles and do all the things I should have been doing for the past 8 months. Let me show you that I can be the man you both deserve." Ava closed her eyes, and for a moment she looked every bit as young and vulnerable as she had that first day she'd walked into his office with her resume and her nervous smile. "I'm tired, Elias," she whispered. "I'm so tired of being strong all the time, I don't know if I have the energy to teach you how to love us." The admission broke something open in his chest. "Then don't. Just let me figure it out. Let me be here while I figure it out." Wesley chose that moment to let out a small cry, and Ava's eyes immediately opened, her body tensing with the instinctive response of a new mother. But before she could move, Elias was already standing. "Can I?" he asked, gesturing toward the bassinet. She hesitated, then nodded. Elias had never held a baby before, but something about his son felt natural in his arms, like a piece of himself he hadn't known was missing. Wesley settled almost immediately, his crying subsiding into soft whimpers. "He knows you," Ava said, wonder creeping into her voice. "Or he's just tired of listening to us talk," Elias replied. But there was amazement in his own voice too. As he looked down at his son's perfect face, Elias made a silent promise. Whatever it took, however long it took, he would earn his place in this family, even if it meant learning to trust himself again. 3 days later, Elias found himself standing in the baby section of Target at 6 in the morning, completely overwhelmed. He'd never realized how many different types of diapers existed. Newborn, size 1, sensitive skin, overnight protection, organic cotton. The options seemed endless. A young mother with a toddler in her cart gave him a sympathetic look as he stood frozen in the aisle, clutching a hastily scribbled list that Ava had given him. "First time?" she asked kindly. "Is it that obvious?" She smiled. The deer in headlights expression gives it away. "How old?" 3 days.
No, the one
The
from that
word
van
still
you were-
felt surreal coming out of his mouth. 3 days ago, he'd been a childless billionaire who ate takeout for dinner and worked 16-hour days. Now he was a father, standing in Target at dawn because Wesley had gone through his last diaper at 4 a.m., and Ava was too exhausted to leave the hospital yet. Newborn diapers, then, and get the sensitive skin ones. Baby's skin is delicate at first. She pointed to a blue package. You'll go through about 10 a day for the first month. 10 a day. Elias did the mental math and grabbed 3 packages, then reconsidered and grabbed 2 more. Better to be prepared. By the time he made it back to Harborview Medical Center, the morning shift nurses were making their rounds. He'd become a familiar face over the past 3 days, arriving early with coffee for Ava and staying late to learn everything he could about caring for a newborn. It wasn't easy. Nothing about parenthood was intuitive for him. He'd fumbled through his first diaper change, needed 3 attempts to properly swaddle Wesley, and had nearly panicked when the baby wouldn't stop crying during his second night. But he was learning, and more importantly, he was staying. You're back early, Ava noted as he entered room 314. She was sitting up in bed, Wesley cradled against her chest, and there was something different about her expression, less guarded, more willing to let him into their small bubble. I wanted to be here when Dr. Martinez makes her rounds to ask about the discharge process. He set the bag of supplies on the windowsill and pulled out a coffee cup from the hospital cafeteria. Decaf, with that vanilla creamer you like. You remembered. I remember everything about you, Ava. That's been the problem. She accepted the coffee gratefully, careful not to disturb Wesley. The discharge papers should be ready this afternoon. I'll need to set up the pediatrician appointment, and there's a follow-up visit in 2 weeks. We'll need to set up the appointments, Elias corrected gently. If you'll let me be part of this. Ava was quiet for a moment, studying his face. My apartment is small. 1 bedroom, barely enough space for me and the baby. It's not exactly what you're used to. Elias had been dreading this conversation. He'd driven past her apartment building the night before, a modest complex in Ballard, the kind of place where working people lived paycheck to paycheck. It was clean and safe, but tiny, and the thought of his son growing up in a space smaller than his office made his chest tight with worry. I have a house, he said carefully. Plenty of room, a good neighborhood, space for Wesley to grow up. You could both. No. The word was firm but not angry. I'm not moving in with you, Elias. We're not playing house just because we have a baby together. That's not what I meant, isn't it? She shifted Wesley to her other arm, and the baby made a soft sound of contentment. Look, I appreciate that you want to be involved. I do, but I won't be your charity case, and I won't pretend we're something we're not just to make co-parenting easier. The honesty stung, but he respected it. Then what do you want? How do we make this work? I don't know yet. She looked down at Wesley, her expression softening. I know I want him to know his father. I know I want him to grow up feeling loved and secure. Beyond that, we'll have to figure it out as we go. A knock on the door interrupted them. Dr. Martinez entered, followed by a social worker Elias hadn't met before. A middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a clipboard. Good morning, Ms. Bennett. Mr. Thorne. Dr. Martinez smiled warmly. I have good news. Mom and baby are both cleared for discharge this afternoon. All the tests came back normal, feeding is going well, and Wesley is gaining weight beautifully. That's wonderful, Ava said, relief evident in her voice. The social worker stepped forward. I'm Janet Morrison. I just need to go over a few things for the discharge paperwork. Living arrangements, emergency contacts, that sort of thing. Of course. Ava straightened slightly, and Elias could see her preparing for what she clearly expected to be a difficult conversation. Will you be going home with the father? Janet asked, pen poised over her clipboard. No, I have my own apartment. Wesley and I will be fine there. Janet made a note, then looked at Elias. And your involvement, Mr. Thorne? I'll be as involved as Ava allows me to be, he said honestly. I want to be a good father to Wesley. I'm still learning how. Something in his answer must have satisfied Janet, because she smiled and made another note. It's refreshing to see parents who are focused on what's best for the child rather than their own egos. We'll need to establish a formal custody arrangement eventually, but for now the most important thing is that Wesley has 2 parents who love him. Love. The word hung in the air like a promise and a challenge. Elias looked at his son, sleeping peacefully in Ava's arms, and realized with startling clarity that it was true. Somewhere between the first time he'd held Wesley and this moment, love had crept in past all his defenses. There's one more thing, he said, his voice careful. The birth certificate. We discussed the name. Ava met his eyes across the small hospital room. Wesley James Thorne, she said quietly. If you're sure you want that responsibility. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. As Janet wrote down the name that would make his son officially his, Elias felt something shift inside him. This wasn't just about proving himself anymore. This was about becoming the man Wesley deserved to call father. And maybe, if he was very lucky and worked very hard, becoming the man Ava might someday trust again. 2 a.m. had become Elias's new favorite time of day, though he never would have believed it a week ago. He sat in the worn recliner beside Wesley's crib, bottle-feeding his son by the soft glow of a nightlight shaped like a crescent moon. Ava's small apartment was quiet, except for the gentle sounds of Wesley nursing and the distant hum of traffic from Aurora Avenue. Through the thin walls, he could hear Mrs. Kellerman's television playing late-night infomercials at low volume. "Your mom's finally getting some sleep," he whispered to Wesley, who stared up at him with those serious gray eyes. "She's been running on about 3 hours a night since we brought you home. I don't know how she did it alone for so long." The past week had been a revelation. Elias had restructured his entire life around feeding schedules and diaper changes, delegating most of his business responsibilities to his capable team. He'd never imagined that watching a tiny human sleep could be more fascinating than quarterly profit reports. But here he was, completely captivated by every breath his son took. Wesley finished his bottle and Elias lifted him carefully to his shoulder, patting his back with the gentle rhythm Ava had taught him. The baby let out a small burp, and Elias couldn't help but smile. "Good job, buddy. Your mom says you're supposed to do that." "He is pretty proud of his burps," came Ava's soft voice from the doorway. She was wearing an old college t-shirt and pajama pants, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, and she looked more beautiful than any woman had a right to look at 2 in the morning. "I thought you were sleeping." "I was, but I'm still adjusting to someone else being here for the night feedings." She patted across the small living room and sank into the couch with a tired sigh. Not complaining, just, "It's different." Different was an understatement. For the past week, Elias had been sleeping on Ava's uncomfortable couch, which was about 3 inches too short for his 6-foot frame. He'd offered multiple times to get a hotel room nearby, but Ava had insisted he stay. "If you're going to learn to be a father, you need to learn what the nights are really like," she'd said. She'd been right. The nights were exhausting, overwhelming, and strangely magical all at once. "He's getting heavier," Elias noted, shifting Wesley's weight as he continued patting his back. "Dr. Patterson says he's gaining weight perfectly. All that feeding is paying off." Ava smiled. The first genuine, unguarded smile he'd seen from her since before everything fell apart. "You're getting good at this, you know. The whole dad thing." The compliment warmed him more than it probably should have. "I have a good teacher. You have good instincts. I've been watching you with him, and it's natural. You don't hold him like he's going to break anymore." Wesley had fallen back asleep against Elias's shoulder, his tiny body completely relaxed. Elias stood carefully and moved to place him back in the crib, a process that had taken him days to master without waking the baby. "Success," he whispered as Wesley settled into sleep without stirring. "Coffee?" Ava asked quietly, already moving toward the small kitchen. At 2 a.m.? Welcome to new parent life. Sleep is optional. Caffeine is essential. Elias followed her into the kitchen, which was barely large enough for both of them to stand in comfortably. He watched her move around the space with efficient familiarity, and it struck him how completely she'd built a life without him. The refrigerator was covered with appointment reminders and grocery lists written in her neat handwriting. A basket of clean baby clothes sat on the small table, waiting to be folded. Everything was organized, purposeful, and achingly domestic. "I've been thinking," Ava said as she started the coffee maker, "about what comes next. When you go back to your real life. This is my real life now." She turned to face him, leaning against the small counter. "Elias, you can't sleep on my couch forever. You have a company to run, a life in downtown Seattle. This," she gestured around the tiny apartment, "this isn't sustainable for you. What if I don't want to go back to that life?" "What do you mean?" Elias ran a hand through his hair, trying to find the right words. "A week ago, my biggest concern was whether the Johansson merger would close on time. I worked 14-hour days and ate dinner at my desk and called that living. Now I spend half the night feeding our son, and I've never been happier. Tell me how that makes sense." Ava poured coffee into 2 mismatched mugs. His was a souvenir from Pike Place Market. Hers had a cartoon cat on it that was probably left over from college. "It makes sense because you love him," she said simply. "But love doesn't pay for diapers and and doctor visits and college funds. You have responsibilities. My biggest responsibility is to him, to both of you. I don't need you to take care of me, Elias. Her voice was gentle but firm. I was doing fine before you came back. Fine isn't the same as happy. The words hung between them, and Elias immediately regretted them. He had no right to make assumptions about her happiness, no right to suggest her life was lacking without him in it. I'm sorry, he said quickly. I didn't mean... No, you're right. Ava wrapped her hands around her coffee mug, staring down at the dark liquid. I was surviving, not living, but that was my choice to make. Just like this is my choice to make. What choice? She looked up at him, and he saw something in her eyes that made his chest tighten with hope and fear in equal measure. Whether to let you try again, whether to trust that you won't run the next time things get complicated. She paused, taking a shaky breath. Whether to admit that having you here this week has felt like maybe we could be a family after all. The admission hit him like a physical blow. All week he'd been afraid to hope for more than co-parenting, afraid to push for something she wasn't ready to give. Ava, I'm scared, she whispered. I'm terrified that if I let myself believe in us again, you'll find another reason to doubt me, another excuse to walk away. Elias set down his coffee and moved closer, close enough to see the exhaustion and hope warring in her green eyes. I'm scared too, he admitted, scared that I'll mess this up again, scared that I don't know how to be the man you both deserve, but I'm more scared of not trying. A soft cry from the living room interrupted them, and they both smiled at the familiar sound. Wesley's ready for round two, Ava said softly. I'll get him. As Elias walked back toward the crib, he heard Ava whisper behind him, we'll figure it out, somehow. And for the first time in a week, Elias believed they actually might. The grocery store on a Tuesday afternoon was a completely different world than Elias had ever experienced. He pushed the cart down the cereal aisle while Wesley slept peacefully in his car seat, which was carefully secured in the cart's main basket. Ava walked beside him, checking items off a list written on the back of an envelope, and for a moment, they looked like any other young family doing their weekly shopping. We need formula, but not the expensive kind, Ava said, pausing in front of the baby section. The store brand works just as well, and it's half the price. Elias automatically reached for the name brand option, then caught himself. 2 weeks ago, he wouldn't have thought twice about spending an extra $20 on formula. Now, watching Ava carefully compare prices and check for sales, he was beginning to understand how different their worlds really were. The pediatrician said Wesley's doing great on what we've been using, she continued, placing the generic formula in the cart. No need to fix what isn't broken. Ava, he said carefully, you know I can help with expenses, right? Wesley is my son, too. I know, and I appreciate that, but I'm not comfortable with you paying for everything just because you can. She moved toward the produce section, and he followed, still trying to navigate this new dynamic. I want to contribute, too. I want to feel like an equal partner in this, even if it means choosing the cheaper option when there's no need to. She stopped walking and turned to face him, her expression serious, especially then. Elias, you make more money in a month than I've made in my entire life. If I let you start paying for everything, what happens to my independence? What happens when Wesley gets older and wonders why Daddy buys everything and Mommy contributes nothing? The question hit him harder than he'd expected. He'd been thinking about financial contributions in terms of practical necessity, but she was thinking about their son's future understanding of relationships and equality. I never thought about it that way. I know you didn't, and that's not your fault. You've never had to. She reached over and adjusted Wesley's blanket, her touch gentle and automatic. But I have to think about these things. I have to think about what kind of example we're setting. They continued shopping in comfortable silence for a few minutes, and Elias found himself really looking at the other shoppers for the first time. A mother with 2 small children was carefully counting items as she placed them in her cart. An elderly man was comparing the prices of different pasta brands. A young couple was having a quiet argument about whether they could afford the organic milk. I want to show you something, he said suddenly. What? This weekend. If you're willing. There's something I want you and Wesley to see. Ava looked skeptical. Elias, if this is about your house again, it's not about moving in. It's about... understanding, about showing you what I meant when I said I want this to be my real life. Saturday morning found them driving through the streets of Queen Anne, Wesley sleeping peacefully in his car seat in the back of Elias's Range Rover. Ava had been quiet during the drive, occasionally giving directions even though Elias's GPS was perfectly capable of getting them to their destination. Turn left here, she said as they approached a small residential street lined with modest single-family homes. Elias followed her directions and pulled up in front of a house he'd never seen before, a 1940s bungalow with a small front yard and a porch that had seen better days. An elderly woman was sitting on the front steps, and her face lit up when she saw their car. Mrs. Kellerman, Elias asked. I asked her to watch Wesley for a couple hours, Ava explained, already getting out of the car. There's something I want to show you, too. They transferred Wesley and his diaper bag to Mrs. Kellerman, who cooed over him like he was her own grandchild, and then Ava led Elias to a bus stop at the corner. We're taking the bus? You said you wanted to understand my life. This is part of it. The ride took 45 minutes and 3 transfers. Elias, who was used to traveling everywhere by car or private plane, found himself fascinated by the cross-section of Seattle life on public transportation. Ava seemed completely at ease, chatting quietly with him about Wesley's sleep schedule and her plans to return to work part-time. This is our stop, she said, as the bus pulled up to a busy intersection in South Seattle. She led him down a street lined with small businesses, a laundromat, a corner market, a Vietnamese restaurant with plastic tables on the sidewalk. Finally, she stopped in front of a narrow storefront with a hand-painted sign, Bright Beginnings Childcare. This is where I'm planning to take Wesley when I go back to work, she said. It's not fancy, but the owner, Carmen, is amazing. She's been doing this for 15 years, and she treats every child like family. Through the window, Elias could see a group of toddlers playing with blocks, while a woman with graying hair sat on the floor beside them, reading from a picture book. The space was clean but clearly well used, with artwork covering every available wall surface and toys that showed the wear of many small hands. It costs a third of what the fancy daycare centers charge, Ava continued, and Wesley would be with kids from all different backgrounds, not just children of wealthy parents. Elias understood what she was showing him. This wasn't just about childcare. It was about values, about the kind of world she wanted their son to grow up in. Your turn, she said simply. The second bus ride took them in the opposite direction toward the waterfront and the gleaming towers of downtown Seattle. But instead of going to his office or his penthouse, Elias led her to a small park overlooking Elliott Bay. I used to come here when I was a kid, he said as they found a bench facing the water. My parents were always traveling or working, and sometimes the nanny would bring me here to feed the ducks. It's beautiful. I was thinking maybe this could be Wesley's place too. Not fancy or expensive, just somewhere he could come when he needs to think. Somewhere that belongs to all of us. Ava was quiet for a long moment, watching a ferry make its way across the gray water. You're trying to find a middle ground, she said finally. I'm trying to find our ground, yours, mine, and Wesley's. A seagull landed near their feet, clearly hoping for food, and Ava laughed softly. I don't have any snacks, sorry. Next time, Elias said. We'll bring crackers next time. Next time, she agreed, and the words felt like a promise. As they sat together watching the water, Wesley's absence felt temporary rather than divisive. For the first time since he'd walked back into their lives, Elias felt like they were building something new together, not trying to recreate what they'd lost, but creating something better. The call came at 7:43 p.m. on a Thursday, just as Elias was giving Wesley his evening bottle. Elias Thorne, he answered, balancing the phone between his ear and shoulder while keeping his eyes on his son's sleepy face. Mr. Thorne, this is Rebecca from your office. I'm so sorry to call this late, but there's been a development with the Morrison acquisition. Their legal team is threatening to pull out unless we can get someone to Tokyo by tomorrow night. Elias felt his stomach drop. The Morrison deal had been 18 months in the making, a merger that would expand Thorne Aviation into the Asian market and secure the company's future for the next decade. Can't Jameson handle it? He asked, though he already knew the answer. His business partner was brilliant with numbers but terrible at the delicate personal negotiations that had made this deal possible. Mr. Morrison specifically asked for you, sir. He said if you're not there for the final signing, he'll take it as a sign that Thorne Aviation isn't fully committed. Wesley had finished his bottle and was making soft cooing sounds against Elias's shoulder. From the kitchen, He could hear Ava humming quietly as she cleaned up from dinner, a domestic symphony that had become the soundtrack of his new life. How long would I need to be there? 3 days minimum, maybe 4 if there are complications. 4 days. It didn't sound like much, but it might as well have been 4 months. The longest he'd been away from Wesley since the baby was born was a few hours for a haircut. The thought of being on the other side of the world, unable to help with night feedings or diaper changes, made his chest tight with anxiety. "Sir? What should I tell Mr. Morrison?" "Give me an hour," Elias said. "I'll call you back." He ended the call and sat in the silence of Ava's small living room, Wesley's warm weight against his chest the only thing anchoring him to the moment. "Everything okay?" Ava appeared in the doorway, a dish towel in her hands and concern in her eyes. "Business crisis. I might need to go to Tokyo." "Oh." She moved into the room and sat on the couch across from him. "When?" "Tomorrow. For 3 or 4 days." The silence stretched between them, filled with all the things they'd worked so hard to build over the past 3 weeks. Wesley shifted in his arms, tiny fingers curling around the edge of Elias's shirt as if he could sense the tension in the room. "It's a big deal?" Ava asked finally. "The biggest. 18 months of work, hundreds of jobs at stake. If this falls through," he shook his head, "it would be a significant blow to the company. Then you have to go." The certainty in her voice surprised him. He'd expected arguments, maybe accusations that he was choosing work over family again. Instead, she looked calm, even supportive. "Ava, I can't just leave you alone with Wesley. Not now, when we're still figuring everything out. Elias, I took care of him by myself for weeks before you came back into our lives. I think I can manage 3 days. That's not the point." He stood carefully, moving to place Wesley in his bouncer chair. "The point is that I don't want to leave. 3 weeks ago, I would have been on a plane without a second thought. Now the idea of being away from you both makes me feel sick." She studied his face, searching for something. "What if I said you couldn't go? What if I told you that leaving now would prove you're still the same man who puts business before everything else?" The question hit him like a physical blow, because part of him had been thinking exactly the same thing. "Is that what you're saying?" "No." She stood and moved closer, close enough that he could smell the soft scent of her shampoo. "I'm saying that the old Elias would have already been packing. The new Elias is sitting here agonizing over a 3-day trip because he's become a father who puts his family first. Even if that family isn't sure they want me yet, especially then." She reached out and touched his arm, the first intentional physical contact they'd shared since Wesley was born. "Go to Tokyo, save your company, but come back to us. What if something happens while I'm gone? What if Wesley gets sick, or you need help, or then I'll call you. And if it's really serious, you'll get on the next plane home. But Elias, you can't protect us from every possible problem by never leaving the apartment." He knew she was right, but the fear was still there, cold and sharp in his chest. What if this changes things? What if being away makes you realize you're better off without me? Ava was quiet for a long moment. And when she spoke, her voice was soft, but steady. "Or what if it makes me realize how much I've come to depend on you being here? How much Wesley lights up when he hears your voice? How much easier everything feels when we're doing it together?" The admission hung between them like a bridge neither of them had been brave enough to cross before. "You really think I should go? I think you should do what you need to do to secure our son's future. And I think you should trust that what we've built together is strong enough to survive 3 days apart." Wesley chose that moment to let out a small cry, and they both turned toward him automatically. Elias knelt beside the bouncer and touched his son's cheek, marveling at how something so small could have completely rearranged his priorities. "Okay," he said finally, "I'll go, but I want you to promise me something." "What?" "If you need anything, anything at all, you'll call me. I don't care if it's 3 a.m. Tokyo time, and you just want to hear an adult voice because Wesley's been crying for 2 hours. Promise me you won't try to handle everything alone. I promise. And promise me that when I come back, we'll talk. Really talk about what this is, what we want it to be, what we're building together." She nodded, and he thought he saw something that might have been relief in her eyes. "I promise that too." As Elias called Rebecca back to confirm his travel arrangements, he felt something shift inside him. For the first time since Wesley was born, he was choosing to leave his family, but somehow making that choice because it was best for all of them felt different from running away. It felt like the kind of decision a real father would make. And maybe if he was very lucky, the kind of decision that would prove to Ava that he really had changed. The video call connected at 6 a.m. Tokyo time, 2 p.m. Seattle time, and Elias felt his heart ease the moment Ava's face appeared on his laptop screen. "How's my boy?" he asked, adjusting his tie in the sterile hotel room that had become his temporary prison for the past 3 days. "See for yourself." Ava tilted her phone and Wesley came into view, lying on his playmat and batting at the colorful toys hanging above him. Even through the pixelated video connection, Elias could see how much more alert and focused his son looked. "He's gotten stronger," Elias said, amazement coloring his voice. "Look at how he's reaching for things. Babies change fast at this age. Mrs. Kellerman says he's been asking for you." Ava's smile was tired but genuine. "Well, not asking exactly, but he keeps looking at the door like he's waiting for someone." The comment hit Elias harder than it should have. 3 days. He'd only been gone 3 days, and already he felt like he was missing everything important. "How are you holding up?" he asked, studying her face for signs of exhaustion or stress. "Better than I expected, actually. I forgot how much I enjoyed having the apartment to myself sometimes. Don't get me wrong," she added quickly. "I miss having you here, but it's been nice to remember that I can handle things on my own when I need to." There was something in her tone that made Elias set down the coffee cup he'd been holding. "Ava, is everything all right? You sound, different, confident, like something's changed." She was quiet for a moment, and he watched her adjust Wesley's position on the mat before answering. "I've been thinking a lot these past few days. About us, about what we're doing, about what I want. And I realized something important." She looked directly into the camera, and even across the thousands of miles between them, her gaze felt intense and purposeful. "I've been so afraid of getting hurt again that I've been holding back, keeping you at arm's length even while letting you into our lives." Elias felt his pulse quicken. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that watching you agonize over leaving for this trip, seeing how much you hated being away from Wesley, made me understand something. You're not the same man who walked away from me 8 months ago." "Ava, let me finish." Her voice was gentle but determined. "I've been testing you, Elias, making you prove yourself over and over because I was too scared to just believe. But you have proven yourself. Every night feeding, every diaper change, every time you put Wesley's needs before your own comfort. You've shown me who you really are." The hotel room suddenly felt too small, too far from where he needed to be. "What does that mean for us when I get back?" "It means I want to try. Really try. Not just co-parenting or figuring things out as we go, but actually building something together. A family. A life." The words he'd been hoping to hear for weeks, and he was trapped in a hotel room on the other side of the world. "I want that too, more than I've ever wanted anything." "I know you do. I can see it in the way you look at Wesley. Hear it in your voice when you call. And Elias, I can feel it in the way you look at me." Before he could respond, his phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "Morrison wants to meet in 10 minutes. Final signatures today. I have to go," he said reluctantly. "The final meeting is starting. Go close your deal. We'll be here when you get back." "Ava, thank you for trusting me to leave and for everything you just said. Thank you for coming back into our lives and fighting for your place in them." The connection ended, and Elias stared at the blank screen for a moment, trying to process everything that had just happened. Then he grabbed his jacket and headed for the elevator, more motivated than he'd ever been to finish this deal and get home. The next 8 hours passed in a blur of handshakes, signatures, and carefully worded contracts. By the time the final documents were signed and the champagne was poured, Elias had secured the biggest deal in Thorn Aviation's history. Morrison personally shook his hand and promised a long and profitable partnership. "You should be celebrating," Rebecca said as they waited for their car to the airport. "This deal is going to change everything for the company." "I am celebrating," Elias replied, checking his watch and calculating time zones. "I'm just celebrating what's waiting for me at home more than what we accomplished here." The flight back to Seattle felt endless. Elias tried to sleep but found himself too wired, too eager to get back to his family. He spent most of the 14 hours thinking about Ava's words, about the future they might actually be able to build together. When he finally walked through the door of Ava's apartment at 11 p.m. on Sunday night, the first thing he heard was crying. Not Wesley's usual hungry cry, but the distressed wail of a sick baby. "Ava," he called out, dropping his suitcase and moving quickly toward Wesley's corner of the living room. "In here," came her exhausted voice from the bathroom. He found them both in the small space. Ava sitting on the edge of the bathtub while Wesley, wearing only a diaper, cried in her arms. The air was thick with steam from the hot shower running behind the closed curtain. "What's wrong?" Elias asked, immediately moving to check Wesley's forehead with the back of his hand. "He started running a fever about 6 hours ago. I called the pediatrician, and she said to try a steam bath to help with congestion. He's been crying on and off since this afternoon." Ava looked utterly exhausted, her hair damp from the steam, and her eyes red with worry and fatigue. Without thinking, Elias reached for Wesley, and she handed him over gratefully. "Have you slept at all?" "A little, maybe an hour this morning before his fever spiked." Elias cradled his son against his chest, feeling the slight heat radiating from the small body. Wesley's crying gradually subsided, replaced by small hiccups and the stuffy breathing of a congested baby. "You should have called me," he said softly. "You were in the most important meeting of your career. I wasn't going to interrupt that for a common cold." "Ava, look at me." When she raised her tired eyes to his, he continued, "There is no meeting, no deal, no amount of money that's more important than you calling me when our son is sick. Do you understand that?" She nodded, and he saw tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. "I missed you," she whispered. "Both of us did. And when he got sick, I realized how much easier everything is when you're here. I missed you too, both of you. So much that I thought about getting on a plane home yesterday, deal or no deal. But you stayed and finished what you started." "I did. Because you were right. Wesley deserves a father who can provide for his future. But he also deserves a father who's here when he needs him." Wesley had fallen asleep against Elias's shoulder, his breathing gradually becoming easier in the steamy air. Ava turned off the shower and leaned against the bathroom wall, looking like she might collapse from exhaustion. "Come on," Elias said gently. "Let's get you both some rest." As he carried his sleeping son toward the crib and helped Ava to the couch, Elias realized something had fundamentally shifted during his time away. They weren't just figuring out co-parenting anymore. They were becoming a family. Wesley's fever broke on the third night after Elias returned from Tokyo. But it wasn't until the following morning that everything else broke open between them. Elias woke up on the couch to find Ava standing by the window, holding their son and staring out at the gray Seattle dawn. She was wearing one of his old t-shirts, something that had happened gradually over the past few weeks as the boundaries between his things and hers began to blur, and her hair was loose around her shoulders. "He's better," she said without turning around. "Temp's been normal for 6 hours. That's good." Elias sat up, running a hand through his sleep-rumpled hair. "How are you?" Scared. The honesty in her voice made him stand and move closer. "About Wesley?" "About this." She turned to face him, and he saw something raw and vulnerable in her green eyes. "About us. About how right this feels and how terrified I am that I'm going to mess it up." Wesley was awake in her arms, looking between his parents with the serious expression that made him seem wise beyond his 6 weeks. Elias reached out to touch his son's cheek, and Wesley immediately turned toward his father's hand. "You're not going to mess anything up. You don't know that." Ava's voice was barely above a whisper. "I've never done this before, Elias. I've never been part of a family, never had someone who stayed. What if I don't know how?" The admission hit him like a physical blow. In all their conversations about his fears and his past mistakes, he'd never really considered that she might be just as terrified as he was, just for different reasons. "Tell me," he said gently. "Tell you what?" "About not having a family. About people not staying." Ava moved to sit on the couch, settling Wesley against her chest. For a moment, Elias thought she wouldn't answer. Then she began to speak, her voice soft and distant. "After my parents died, I lived with 6 different foster families over 4 years. Some were nice, some weren't, but none of them were permanent. I learned not to get too attached, not to expect anyone to keep me." She stroked Wesley's back with gentle circles. "My grandfather was the exception. He took me in when I was 16, and for 2 years I actually believed in family again. Then he had his heart attack. How old were you?" 18. Technically an adult. So back into the system I went until I aged out. She looked up at him, and he saw tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. "Do you know what it's like to never be anyone's first choice? To always be temporary?" Elias sank down beside her on the couch, close enough to touch but not presuming to. "Is that why you were so angry when I walked away? Not just because of what we had, but because you proved that I was temporary again. That even when someone claimed to love me, I was still disposable the moment things got complicated." The words were like arrows. each one finding its mark in his chest. He thought about that morning 8 months ago, about the cold efficiency with which he dismissed her, and felt sick with the knowledge of what his cowardice had cost them both. Ava, I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty, she interrupted. I'm telling you because I need you to understand why this is so hard for me. Why even now when everything feels perfect, I keep waiting for you to realize that I'm not worth the trouble. Wesley made a soft sound and turned his head toward Elias, as if he could sense the tension in the room. Without thinking, Elias reached for his son, and Ava handed him over. You want to know what I realized in Tokyo? Elias said, settling Wesley against his shoulder. I realized that I spent so many years being afraid of being hurt, that I became someone who hurt other people first. I thought it was protecting me, but all it did was ensure that I'd end up alone. You're not alone now. No, I'm not. And neither are you. He shifted so he could look directly at her. Ava, you are not temporary. You are not disposable. You are the mother of my child and the woman I fell in love with, and I will spend the rest of my life proving to you that you are worth everything. How can you be so sure? Because look at what you built. He gestured around the small apartment, but he meant something bigger than the physical space. Look at the life you created for yourself and for Wesley. Look at how you loved our son, even when you had every reason to hate me. Look at how you let me back in when you could have shut me out forever. Tears were sliding down her cheeks now, and she didn't try to wipe them away. I don't know how to be in a relationship, Elias. I don't know how to trust that someone will stay when things get hard. Then we'll learn together. We'll mess up and figure it out and mess up again, and we'll keep choosing each other anyway. What if I get scared and push you away? Then I'll remind you that I'm not going anywhere. What if I get overwhelmed and say something stupid? Then I'll remind you that you're not the same man who ran away 8 months ago. Wesley had fallen asleep between them, his tiny body warm and trusting against Elias's chest, looking down at his son, then up at the woman who had given him everything he'd never known he wanted. Elias felt something settle in his chest that he'd never experienced before. Peace, belonging, home. I love you, he said simply. I love both of you. I should have said it 8 months ago, and I should have said it every day since I came back, but I was afraid it was too much too soon. It's not too much. Ava reached out and touched his face, her fingers gentle against his jaw. I love you too. I never stopped, even when I wanted to, even when I tried to. So what happens now? Now we stop being scared of what we might lose and start building what we want to keep. Elias leaned forward and kissed her, soft and careful and full of promise. When they broke apart, Wesley was still sleeping peacefully between them, and the morning light streaming through the windows felt like a benediction. I want to buy a house, Elias said suddenly. Not for you to move into, but for us to choose together. Somewhere with a yard for Wesley to play in and enough bedrooms for more children someday, if we want them. Somewhere that's ours. I'd like that. I want to marry you. Not because we have a baby together, but because I can't imagine my life without you in it. I'd like that too. I want to be the man you deserve, the father Wesley deserves, the partner you can count on. You already are, Ava whispered, and for the first time since he'd known her, her voice held no doubt, no fear, no reservation, only love and certainty and the promise of all their tomorrows. Outside, Seattle was waking up, cars starting, coffee brewing, people beginning their ordinary days. But inside Ava's small apartment, something extraordinary was happening. A family was being born. 2 years later, the sound of toddler laughter echoed across the backyard as Wesley James Thorne chased soap bubbles with the determined focus that only a 2-year-old could possess. Elias sat on the back porch of their Queen Anne home, watching his son's serious pursuit of the floating spheres while Ava worked in the small vegetable garden she'd insisted on planting along the fence. The late afternoon sun caught the highlights in her hair, now shorter and styled differently than it had been in their early days, but still beautiful enough to make his breath catch sometimes when she turned toward him with that smile. Daddy, look, Wesley called out, pointing at a particularly large bubble that was drifting just out of his reach. Big one. I see it, buddy. Can you catch it? Wesley jumped with both feet, his chubby hands grasping at air as the bubble floated higher and finally popped against the branch of their maple tree. Instead of frustration, his face broke into delighted giggles. It disappeared, he announced, as if this was the most magical thing that had ever happened. Just like magic, Elias agreed, marveling at how easily joy came to his son. Wesley had Ava's optimism and Elias's stubborn determination, wrapped up in a package of boundless energy and infectious laughter. He's getting so big, Ava said, settling onto the porch step beside Elias with dirt under her fingernails and satisfaction in her voice. I swear he grew another inch just this week. Mrs. Patterson at daycare says he's been asking about airplanes constantly. Wants to know how they stay up in the sky. Wonder where he gets that from. Ava bumped his shoulder playfully. Maybe it's time for that first flying lesson you keep threatening. When he's 3. That was the deal. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching Wesley discover a ladybug on the grass and immediately squat down to examine it with scientific intensity. Everything was worth investigating when you were 2 years old. Every day held new wonders. I got a call from Carmen today, Ava said, referring to Wesley's daycare provider. She wanted to let us know that Wesley's been taking care of the younger babies, bringing them toys when they cry, sharing his snacks. He's got your heart and your protective instincts. She leaned against Elias's shoulder and he automatically wrapped an arm around her. Do you ever think about that morning, when everything fell apart? It had been months since either of them had brought up those dark days, but Elias knew exactly what she meant. Which part? The part where you were so convinced I was leaving that you pushed me away first. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd just asked me? Elias considered the question seriously. We probably would have figured it out sooner. Wesley might have had both his parents from the beginning. But I don't think I would have been ready to be the father he needed, or the partner you deserved. I had to lose everything to understand what really mattered. Wesley had moved on from the ladybug, and was now attempting to climb the small apple tree they'd planted last spring. Elias started to get up to spot him, but Ava caught his arm. He's fine. Let him figure it out. She was right, as she usually was about these things. Wesley made it about 3 feet up before carefully climbing back down, looking proud of his accomplishment. I have something to tell you, Ava said, and something in her tone made Elias turn to look at her more closely. Good something or bad something? Good something, at least I think it's good. She was smiling, but there was nervousness in her eyes. I'm pregnant. The words hit him like a warm wave, and for a moment he couldn't breathe. Are you sure? Doctor confirmed it yesterday. 8 weeks. Elias pulled her closer, burying his face in her hair and inhaling the familiar scent of her shampoo mixed with garden soil and happiness. How are you feeling about it? Excited, terrified, happy, all of the above. She pulled back to look at him. How are you feeling about it? Like the luckiest man alive. He kissed her forehead, then her nose, then her lips. Wesley's going to be a big brother. Think he'll be okay with sharing? As if summoned by their conversation, Wesley abandoned his tree climbing and ran toward them, throwing himself onto Elias's lap with the complete trust of a child who had never known anything but love and security. Mama, Daddy, look what I found. He opened his small fist to reveal the ladybug, which immediately flew away. Instead of chasing it, Wesley watched it go with wonder. She went home to her babies. Elias and Ava exchanged a look over their son's head, both thinking the same thing. Somehow this little boy already understood what mattered most. Wesley, Ava said gently, how would you feel about having a little brother or sister? Wesley's eyes went wide. A baby? Like at Miss Carmen's? Like that, but one who would live here with us. Would you like that? Wesley considered this with the seriousness he brought to all important decisions. Would I teach them about bubbles? You would teach them about lots of things. Okay, but I'm still the big boy, right? You'll always be our first baby, Elias assured him, and Wesley nodded as if this settled everything important. As the sun began to set behind the Olympics, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, the three of them sat on their porch in the home they'd chosen together, watching bubbles drift across the yard and talking about the baby who would join their family in 7 months. Elias thought about the man he'd been 3 years ago, successful but empty, wealthy but alone, convinced that love was a luxury he couldn't afford. That man never could have imagined this moment. Grass stains on his jeans, toy trucks scattered across his yard, and a heart so full it sometimes ached with gratitude. Do you know what I love most about our story? Ava asked as Wesley dozed against Elias's chest, exhausted from his afternoon of adventures. What's that? It's not a fairy tale. We didn't fall in love and live happily ever after. We fell in love, messed it up completely, broke each other's hearts, and then chose to put the pieces back together. We earned this happiness. Elias looked at his wife. They'd been married for 6 months now in a small ceremony in the same park where they'd first talked about finding their ground together, and felt the truth of her words settle in his bones. We did, he agreed, and we'll keep earning it. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Elias carried his sleeping son inside, while Ava turned off the bubble machine and gathered the scattered toys. They moved through their evening routine with the practiced rhythm of a family that had found its rhythm, bath time and story time, and the soft sounds of a house settling into sleep. Later, as they lay in their bed with Wesley finally asleep in his own room down the hall, Ava's hand found Elias's in the darkness. "I love you," she whispered, words that had become as natural and necessary as breathing. "I love you too," he whispered back. "All of you. All of us." Outside their window, Seattle sparkled with a million lights, each one representing someone else's story, someone else's chance at love and loss and redemption. But inside their home, in their bed, with their son sleeping peacefully down the hall and their future growing inside Ava's body, Elias knew he was exactly where he belonged. Sometimes second chances came disguised as disasters. Sometimes the greatest gifts arrived through the most painful losses. And sometimes when you stopped running from love long enough to let it catch you, it transformed everything you thought you knew about happiness. The sound of a baby crying had once shattered Elias Thorne's carefully constructed world. Now, the sound of his family breathing softly in sleep was the most beautiful music he'd ever heard. The end. Have you ever had a moment where fear made you push away the very thing you needed most? Where pride or past hurt convinced you to choose safety over love? Elias and Ava's story reminds us that sometimes our biggest mistakes can lead to our greatest redemptions, but only if we're brave enough to fight for what truly matters. What would you have done in Elias's place that morning 8 months ago? Would you have had the courage to ask the hard questions instead of making assumptions? And if you were Ava, could you have found the strength to trust again after being abandoned when you needed someone most? Love isn't about perfect people finding each other. It's about imperfect people choosing each other over and over again, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Your participation in our channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.